In the early hours of the morning, while most of southern China lay in complete darkness, the ground beneath Guangxi Province began to shift. At approximately 2:30 a.m. local time, a powerful magnitude 5.2 earthquake struck without warning. There were no sirens, no alerts, no time to prepare, just a sudden, violent rupture deep beneath the Earth's surface that sent shockwaves racing outward through sleeping towns and rural villages. Residents later described being jolted awake by a low, violent roar, like the Earth itself had cracked open. Within seconds, homes began to shake, walls split apart, and power lines snapped in the dark. What followed was chaos. This is the southern China earthquake disaster, a sudden and destructive seismic event that has left communities across the region shaken, displaced, and in mourning. As of today, May 19, 2026, officials have confirmed multiple fatalities, dozens of injuries, and widespread structural damage across several counties. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing as aftershocks continue to rattle already fragile areas. The epicenter was located in a mountainous region where many communities are built along steep slopes and narrow valleys. These areas, while scenic and heavily rural, are particularly vulnerable to seismic activity. When the quake hit, the intensity of the shaking was enough to trigger landslides in surrounding hillsides, further compounding the destruction. In several villages near the epicenter, entire homes collapsed within seconds. Brick and concrete structures that had stood for decades crumbled under the force of the tremor. In some cases, families were trapped before they even realized what was happening. Furniture toppled, ceilings gave way, and in the darkness, visibility dropped to almost nothing as dust filled the air. One of the most dangerous aspects of the quake was its timing. Striking in the middle of the night meant most residents were asleep, unaware of the danger until it was already upon them. For many, escape was impossible. Emergency calls began flooding in within minutes after the shaking stopped. Survivors reported being trapped under debris, unable to move, calling out for help from collapsed rooms and partially destroyed buildings. In rural areas where infrastructure is limited, rescue response times were heavily delayed. As dawn broke, the full scale of the disaster became visible. Entire streets were littered with rubble. Cracked roads ran through villages like fault lines. Utility poles leaned dangerously or lay completely snapped. In some locations, the ground itself had shifted, leaving visible fissures cutting through farmland and residential areas. Rescue teams from China's emergency response agencies were quickly deployed to the affected regions. Firefighters, military personnel, and medical units worked side by side to search through collapsed structures for survivors. Dogs trained in disaster recovery were brought in to detect signs of life beneath the rubble, but conditions on the ground were difficult from the start. Aftershocks continued to shake the region throughout the morning, forcing rescue workers to pause operations repeatedly due to concerns about secondary collapses. In some areas, unstable buildings had to be marked and avoided entirely, as even slight vibrations could bring them down. Families gathered at the edges of disaster zones, watching silently as crews dug through the remains of their homes. Some clutched blankets around their shoulders in the early morning cold. Others stood in shock, staring at what was left of neighborhoods they had lived in for generations. Many were searching for loved ones who had not yet been accounted for. Temporary shelters were quickly established in schools, community centers, and open fields. These spaces filled rapidly with displaced residents who had lost their homes in a matter of seconds. Aid workers distributed blankets, water, and basic medical supplies, but the need quickly outpaced available resources. Hospitals in nearby cities began receiving a steady stream of injured survivors. Many suffered fractures, head injuries, and crush-related trauma. Medical staff worked through exhaustion as emergency rooms filled beyond capacity. Communication lines were also disrupted in several areas. Damage to cell towers and power infrastructure left some villages temporarily cut off from outside contact. Emergency responders were forced to rely on radio systems and satellite communication to coordinate rescue operations across the region. In the most heavily affected counties, authorities reported significant structural damage. Older buildings, particularly those not built to modern seismic standards, were the first to collapse. Schools, residential blocks, and small businesses were among the hardest hit. Early estimates suggest hundreds of buildings have been damaged or destroyed, though the full assessment is still ongoing as access to remote villages remains limited. Geologists studying the event have noted that the region sits near a complex network of fault lines, making it susceptible to moderate earthquakes. While this particular quake was not among the largest on record, its shallow depth significantly increased the intensity of shaking at the surface, amplifying its destructive impact. In addition, local construction practices in rural areas may have contributed to the level of damage. Many older homes were built without modern reinforcement techniques, making them more vulnerable to seismic forces. As rescue operations continue, concerns are growing about the possibility of additional aftershocks. Authorities have warned residents to remain in open areas and avoid returning to damaged buildings until inspections are complete. The risk of further collapses remains high. Nightfall brings a new set of challenges. With temperatures dropping and rain beginning to move into parts of the region, rescue crews are now working under harsh and unpredictable conditions. Floodlights illuminate piles of debris as teams carefully remove rubble piece by piece, searching for any signs of life. Every sound matters, every movement is deliberate. A pause in conversation, a signal from a dog, a faint noise beneath concrete. Each one could mean someone is still alive. For families waiting nearby, time feels suspended. Some have not moved from the same spot since morning, refusing to leave in case news arrives about their loved ones. Others sit in silence at temporary shelters, staring at phones that no longer receive messages from home. Officials have cautioned that the death toll is likely to rise as more areas become accessible and rescue operations expand into remote villages still cut off from communication. For now, the priority remains search and rescue, followed by stabilizing infrastructure and restoring basic services. But beyond the immediate response, experts are already pointing to broader concerns. China, like many countries in seismically active regions, continues to face the challenge of balancing rapid development with disaster resilience. While major cities are often built to strict earthquake codes, rural and mountainous areas can lag behind in infrastructure upgrades, leaving them more exposed when disasters strike. Environmental factors may also play a role in increasing risk. Human development in hillside regions can sometimes destabilize natural terrain, making slopes more vulnerable during seismic activity. Combined with heavy seasonal weather patterns, these conditions can amplify the impact of earthquakes. As the region begins the long process of recovery, satellite imagery is already revealing the extent of the destruction. Cracks in the earth, collapsed structures, entire sections of villages displaced or flattened. What once appeared as stable ground is now visibly fractured. Still, amid the devastation, stories of survival are beginning to emerge. Neighbors pulling neighbors from collapsed homes, families digging through rubble with bare hands before rescuers arrived. Entire communities working together in the earliest moments after the quake to save whoever they could. These moments of resilience stand in contrast to the destruction, reminding many that even in the worst disasters, survival often depends on human connection and immediate response. For now, southern China remains in recovery mode. Aftershocks continue to ripple through the region. Rescue teams continue their search. Families continue to wait for answers. And across the affected provinces, the reality of what happened in those early morning hours is still sinking in. A sudden rupture, a violent shaking, and a disaster that unfolded in less than a minute, but will be felt for years to come. As China confronts the aftermath of this earthquake, one truth remains clear. In moments like these, the ground does not give warning. It simply gives way.